Have you ever wondered how dominant Patrick Kane would have been on a line with Stan Mikita and Bobby Hull? Or how about a Bruins defensive pairing of Ray Bourque and Bobby Orr? Well, in this video, I'm building the best starting lineup of all time for every NHL team, with players from different eras. But there's a catch. I'm basing my selections on how good someone was in their prime with that specific team, even if that lasted only 1 or 2 years. I'm choosing one center, 2 true wingers, although they can be both left wing or right wing, 2 defensemen to play on either side, and a goaltender. Anyway, let me know how I did with your favorite team, and while you're at it, what's your favorite team's biggest screw up ever? Like the Flames trading away Brett Hull, or the Islanders signing Rick DiPietro to a 15-year deal. I'd love to make a video on that sometime, so be sure to comment down below. Alright, let's get started. I randomized our teams, and I ended up with the Florida Panthers first. So at center, I have Alexander Barkov. He's been their best center for sure. Pavel Bure is one of my wingers. He was a 60-goal threat in his prime. And at my other wing, even though Jonathan Huberdeau was excellent for Florida and one time finished 5th for MVP voting, I gotta say Matthew Tkachuk was on a different level this past season. He was 3rd in MVP voting. He had 109 points, and in the playoffs, he was a monster. For my defensemen, you've got some balance between offense and defensive capabilities with both guys. We've got Robert Svela, no major awards, but he was their best defenseman for a while. And as for my other defensemen, Aaron Ekblad's best season came a couple years back when he had 15 goals and 42 assists in just 61 games, and his defensive capabilities were even better before that. And as for my goaltender, John Van Beesbrook was a beast, and he was a Hart Trophy finalist 1 year, but it still has to be Roberto Luongo. With a better team in front of him, he'd probably have won multiple Vezinas. Now to the Oilers, and let's pull in our first viewer comment here from Sports Boys. So we've got center Wayne Gretzky, wingers are Yari Curry and Mark Messier, although you could go with someone like Glenn Anderson. At defense, we have Paul Coffey and Kevin Lowe, and in goal we have Grant Fuhr. And I actually have the same lineup as you. They're all Hall of Famers. The great one at center, Yari Curry, topped off at 71 goals in 1984-85. He was always in the Selke Trophy conversation. As for my other wing, you could say Glenn Anderson because he was the true winger, and Mark Messier did start his time in Edmonton as a winger, but I think he was more effective at center. Regardless, I cheated here and I put him at the left wing. As for our defensemen, we've got Paul Coffey, one of the greatest offensive D-men of all time, and Hall of Famer Kevin Lowe is regarded as one of the best shutdown defensemen of that era. As for my goaltender, it was Grant Fuhr. He was so lights out in the 87-88 season that he actually beat out Wayne Gretzky in MVP voting, finishing 2nd. We go to the Minnesota Wild. We got this comment here from Dante's Typhoon. At forward, Marian Gaborik, Kirill Kaprizov, and Mikko Koivu. Defenseman Jared Spurgeon, and kind of a twisted take here with Brock Faber, and in goal Devin Dubnyk. And actually my roster's pretty similar. So at center, yeah, the Wild haven't had a mega star at that position, so I'm going with Selke Trophy finalist Mikko Koivu. At wing, we've got Kirill Kaprizov. He's already hit 47 goals in a year. He's finished as high as 7th for the MVP. And my other winger is Marian Gaborik. He was a stud for a team that didn't really have a lot of firepower. In his prime, he'd flirt with 40 goals and 40 assists. As for my defenseman, now Ryan Suter, I know he didn't end his time in Minnesota all that great, but in his prime, he did finish as high as 2nd in Norris Trophy voting. Jared Spurgeon is my other defenseman, perennially underrated up until a couple of years ago. Very good two-way defenseman. Jonas Brodin may be a snub here. And as for goaltender, some will say Nicholas Backstrom. He had a lengthy career with the Wild, but Devin Dubnyk in his prime was pretty redonkulous. In the 2014-15 season, he was traded to the Wild and in 39 games had a .936 save percentage and a 1.78 goals against average with 5 shutouts, and he finished 4th in MVP voting. Now to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I'm sure there will be plenty of disagreement here. It's an original 6 team. Now, my roster is based on the Maple Leafs official greatest 100 players of all time. It was determined by the organization in their centennial season, so I'm just going by this guide here. And certainly you can let me know in the comments if certain players were better in their prime than the guys I have here. So center, we have Dave Keon. He was the top ranked Maple Leaf of all time. He won the Conn Smythe in their last Stanley Cup in 1967. At left wing, we've got the Big M, Frank Mahovlich. Twice he finished top 5 in MVP voting. And my other winger is Charlie Conacher. He played in the 1930s before the Leafs even had jersey numbers, but hey, he led the NHL in goals 5 times. As for my defenseman, I've got Borje Salming, one of the great shutdown defensemen of that era, rest in peace, and Tim Horton, a 6-time All-Star who was perennially in the Norris Trophy conversation. And as for my goaltender, as great as Turk Broda was, it's still got to be Johnny Bower. 6 times he led the league in save percentage, and he won 2 Vezina trophies. Now for the Dallas Stars, and I'm just talking about their time in Dallas, but if you want to see my all-time roster for the North Stars and other defunct teams, all you got to do is tap join below and become a member to get access to my video on that. It's available for both membership tiers, but most people end up joining the MVP tier, I'm just saying. Alright, so we got this comment here from Night Dog. So center Mike Modano, wingers are Brett Hull and Dino Ciccarelli, Sergei Zubov and Miro Heiskanen on defense, and Ed Belfour. Now, Dino Ciccarelli played for just the North Stars, not the Dallas Stars, so I did omit him. Now, for my center, I picked Mike Modano. He had 7 seasons of at least 30 goals and was often in the Selke Trophy conversation as the best two-way forward in the NHL. At wing, now don't forget that prime Jamie Benn led the NHL in points and was a finalist for the Hart Trophy. I actually picked him at first, but I do have to choose Brett Hull here because of his clutch goal scoring. He led the NHL with 11 game winners in the 98-99 season, and as we know, he scored the cup-winning goal. And then at wing, we've got Jere Lehtinen, the greatest defensive winger in that era, winning the Selke Trophy 3 times, and he consistently averaged about 50 points in a year. As for my defenseman, Sergei Zubov was often in the Norris Trophy conversation as a Dallas Star, and he had a booming slap shot. And speaking of booming, if you like booming hits, you gotta love Darian Hatcher. He was also a Norris Trophy finalist and the captain of that cup-winning team. With all due respect, I love Miro Heiskanen, and who knows, maybe one day he could actually be on a roster like this. And as for goalie, even though Ed Belfour won that cup and he won a Jennings Trophy in Dallas, I gotta say Marty Turco in his prime was pretty bonkers. Twice he led the NHL in save percentage and goals against average, finishing as high as second for the Vezina. Our next team is the Chicago Blackhawks. We got this comment here from Lucas. At forward, Bobby Hull, Stan Mikita, Patrick Kane. On defense, Pierre Pilote and Chris Chelios. In goal, Tony Esposito, and some honorable mentions there. And actually, I do agree with you with your full roster. So Stan Mikita won 2 MVPs and 4 scoring titles, all due respect to Denny Savard, but Mikita was probably at his best as a center, even though he played some wing. And speaking of wings, we've got Bobby Hull. He led the NHL in goals 7 times and won an MVP to boot. And on the other wing, Patrick Kane's peak was 2015-16 when he won the Hart, the Ted Lindsay, and Art Ross, and he also won a Conn Smythe before then. On defense, we've got Pierre Pilote. He won 3 Norris trophies and was a runner-up 3 other times. And Chris Chelios won 2 Norris trophies with Chicago. He edges out Duncan Keith, who won 2 of his own and also a Conn Smythe. And as for goaltender, take your pick. It's either Glenn Hall, it's Tony Esposito, or it's Ed Belfour. Esposito won 3 Vezinas and finished as high as second for the Hart, so I just decided to go with Tony. On to the Montreal Canadiens, and Eustace, a longtime viewer of this channel, says Guy Lafleur, Jean Beliveau, and Maurice Richard as the forwards, Doug Harvey and Larry Robinson on defense, and Jacques Plante in goal. Now, it can certainly be difficult to really narrow it down for a team as historic as the Canadiens, but actually this is my roster, and I read some other articles out there that have the same. So Jean Beliveau, a 10-time Stanley Cup champion, the Rocket Richard on one wing, and Guy Lafleur, one of the great scorers of that era, on the right wing. He's the all-time leading scorer for the Canadiens. On defense, we've got Doug Harvey. He won 6 Norris trophies with Montreal, and with all due respect to Serge Savard, I chose Big Bird Larry Robinson. He won 2 Norris trophies and was a finalist 4 other times. As for a goaltender, I just say pick one. You got Jacques Plante, Patrick Roy, Carey Price, Ken Dryden, George Hainsworth, George Vezina, even Hart Trophy winner Jose Theodore. But Jacques Plante won 6 Vezina trophies, including 5 in a row, and in that span, he led the league in goals against average each year. Now we get to the Anaheim Ducks. Now, 4 players on this team have been an MVP finalist. One is center Ryan Getzlaf, who finished runner-up for that award, but my center is Paul Kariya, who was a Hart Trophy runner-up. He also had 3 seasons of over 40 goals in the dead puck era. On one wing, we have the Finnish Flash, and that's Teemu Selänne. He led the league in goals twice, and he was also a Hart Trophy finalist in 1998. But there's only been one Duck to actually win that award, and that was Corey Perry in 2011. He also led the NHL with 50 goals that year, so he's my other wing. For defensemen, let's choose the 2 from their cup-winning team. So first of all, Scott Niedermayer won the Conn Smythe and was also the runner-up for the Norris Trophy that year, and in 3rd place that year, it was Chris Pronger. And as for a goaltender, prime Jean-Sébastien Giguère was a beast. We all know how he won the Conn Smythe in the Ducks' run to the final in 03, but he was also pretty outstanding in the 07 run. Now let's get to the Detroit Red Wings. We have this comment here from Matthew, Steve Yzerman at center, Gordie Howe and Brendan Shanahan on the wings, Nick Lidstrom and Red Kelly on defense, and Terry Sawchuk in goal. My roster is almost identical. Now, this is all based on several articles I read, as we do have to stretch way back into history. So at center, I have Yzerman. He had 5 seasons of over 50 goals, including 2 with over 60. He never won the Hart Trophy, but won the Pearson Award as voted on by the players, but you could make a strong case that Sergei Fedorov's prime was even better. At left wing, I have Ted Lindsay ahead of Alex Delvecchio and Brendan Shanahan. In the 47-48 season, he led the league in goals. Then the next year, he finished 4th in MVP voting, and the season after that, he won the scoring race. At right wing, I have Gordie Howe, need I say more? And on defense, we have strong two-way players. We start with Nicholas Lidstrom, who won 6 Norris trophies in a 7-year period, and then we also have Red Kelly, who was a finalist for that award 5 times, winning it once. He also was a 3-time finalist for the MVP. And as for a goaltender, Terry Sawchuk won 3 Vezina trophies in a 4-year span. Our next team is the Ottawa Senators, and we're just talking about the current version of the Senators. So at center, even though Alexei Yashin was a runner-up for the Hart Trophy one time, I still have to say Jason Spezza. If he played the full 82 games in a couple of those years, he could have easily had 100-point seasons. On one wing, we have Daniel Alfredsson. He was putting up over a point per game coming out of the dead puck era. And for our other winger, now Marian Hossa will be considered a snub by a few of you out there, but prime Danny Heatley was crazy. In back-to-back years, he put up 50 goals and over 100 points. For the defensemen, we have 2 future Hall of Famers. Erik Karlsson won 2 Norris trophies, and he was a runner-up 3 other times in Ottawa. And my other defenseman is Zdeno Chara. Now, he was coming into his own as a Senator the year before he signed with the Bruins. He finished as a runner-up for the Norris Trophy that year. And as for my goaltender, I have prime Craig Anderson. He was a man possessed. In 2012-13, he only played 24 games due to personal reasons, but he put up a 1.69 goals against average and a .941 save percentage. He had a couple of great years after that too. All right, now we get to the LA Kings. We got this comment here from the best defenseman. I'm very flattered that Bobby Orr watches my channel. So we have Luc Robitaille, Wayne Gretzky, and Marcel Dionne as the forwards, Drew Doughty and Rob Blake as defensemen, and Jonathan Quick in goal. Now the caveat here is that Wayne Gretzky and Marcel Dionne were both centers. The primes of both of these players in LA were magnificent, with Gretzky winning an MVP and 4 scoring races, and Marcel Dionne winning 2 Pearson Awards and putting up over 50 goals in 6 seasons. So take your pick, but I'll go with the longtime king, Marcel Dionne. Left wing has to be cool hand Luc Robitaille. He scored over 40 goals in each of his first 8 NHL seasons. At his best, he reached 63 goals and 62 assists in 1992-93. And my other winger is Dave Taylor of the Triple Crown line. He averaged 41 goals and 59 assists over a 4-year period and was one of the better defensive wingers of his time. On defense, we've got Rob Blake. He won a Norris Trophy and was a finalist on a separate occasion, and Drew Doughty also won the award and 2 other times was the runner-up. And as for a goaltender, this is interesting, so take your pick between Jonathan Quick and Rogie Vachon. Both players had incredible primes. Quick won 2 Jennings trophies and in 2012 went on one of the greatest postseason runs for a goalie ever. But prime Rogie Vachon, listen to this. He was the runner-up for the MVP in 1975. That year, he led the league with a .927 save percentage when the league average was only .889. He saved over 60 goals above expected, and he was also a Hart Trophy finalist 2 years later, so he's my guy. The Washington Capitals are the next team here, so at center, I have to go with Nicholas Backstrom, even though Adam Oates would be a close second. In Backstrom's best season offensively, he had a career-high 33 goals and 68 assists to finish 9th in MVP voting. And of course, we know that Backstrom maximized the talents of Alex Ovechkin, one of my wingers here. Need I say more? And for my other winger, now I'm torn between Peter Bondra and Mike Gartner. Gartner is a Hall of Famer who had 9 seasons of at least 35 goals in Washington. At his best, he hit 50. But Peter Bondra was largely the offense for the Capitals back in the 90s, and he played in a lower scoring era. He still managed to hit 30 goals 9 times and twice hit 50, finishing as high as 6th for the Hart back in 1998, so for that, I'm gonna take prime Peter Bondra. For the 2 defensemen, I actually don't have John Carlson here. Rod Langway won 2 Norris trophies despite being a more shutdown defenseman, and Scott Stevens benefited a ton from playing with him, and he was often in the Norris Trophy conversation in his own right because he could put up some points. As for my goaltender, with all due respect to Braden Holtby, Olaf Kolzig was an elite playoff goaltender for much of his time in Washington, and he also won a Vezina trophy. For the New Jersey Devils, we have this comment here from Fake Death. Jack Hughes, Patrick Elias, and Zach Parise, or perhaps 2017-18 Taylor Hall. We have Scott Stevens and Scott Niedermayer on defense, and Martin Brodeur. I definitely agree with you with the backside of things. Now at center, the Devils haven't always been that elite at that position, or at least not offensively, so I already think Jack Hughes is the most talented center they've ever had, and he hasn't even reached his prime yet. At left wing, now like Peter Bondra, Patrick Elias was consistently the offense for the Devils for a long time. In the 2001 season, he set a career high with 40 goals and 56 assists, finishing 6th for the MVP, and he was also also money in the playoffs. As for my other wing, this was really difficult. I know Claude Lemieux won the 95 Conn Smythe, and just like the comment, you had Zach Parise, who was kind of in the Hart Trophy conversation at one point. You also had Taylor Hall actually winning that award, but I thought that was more of a flash in the pan. So I chose John McClain. At his prime, he was such a big piece of that offense before their runs to the Stanley Cup. He had 3 straight years of over 40 goals and finished as high as 9th for the MVP. And as I said earlier, Scott Stevens, Scott Niedermayer, Martin Brodeur. That's your backside. All right, on to the Tampa Bay Lightning. So we got this comment here from Vilsfrid. At center, Vincent Lecavalier. The wingers are Steven Stamkos and Martin St. Louis. On defense, we've got Victor Hedman and Dan Boyle. And in goal, we have Andrei Vasilevsky. Hey, I think that's a great roster. And what I like is that Vincent Lecavalier gives that line some size. But I gotta say, Steven Stamkos hit 60 goals as a center. Early on, Stamkos was incredible, so I left him at center. And on my wings, I have Martin St. Louis and I have Nikita Kucherov. Now, Stamkos was a runner-up for the Hart Trophy at one point, and St. Louis, he went off the year the team won the Stanley Cup. He won the Hart, the Pearson, and the Art Ross. And as for Kucherov, he also won the same 3 awards in 2019, and he has a legit shot at the MVP this year too. On defense, we have Victor Hedman, maybe the best defenseman of this era, and Dan Boyle was a great puck mover in his heyday. He could also lay the lumber pretty well. He finished as high as 4th for the Norris. And for the goaltending, now Ben Bishop and Nikolai Hobby-Bulin aren't bad honorable mentions at all, but prime Andrei Vasilevsky still takes the cake, a 4-time Vezina Trophy finalist, winning the award once, and in those runs to the Stanley Cup final, he was a maniac. Now we get to the St. Louis Blues. A little bit of debate here. Center Bernie Fedorko had over 4 seasons of 100 points, so I couldn't leave him off this list. On one of our wings, we have Brett Hull. He had an 86 goal season and won the MVP and the Pearson Award. For my other wing, I actually picked Brian Sutter. Over a 7-year period, he averaged 36 goals and 37 assists, and he finished as high as 6th for the Hart Trophy and 10th in another year. I think the defense is a little bit easier to figure out here. The Blues have had some great ones, but none other than Chris Pronger and Al MacInnis. Hard hits from Pronger and hard shots from both. And in goal, now Glenn Hall did win a Vezina Trophy 1 year in St. Louis, and he backstopped them to 3 straight Stanley Cup Finals appearances. But I'm gonna give this one to Mike Liut, who in his first 2 NHL seasons finished 6th and then 2nd for the MVP. That second year, he also won the Pearson Award, and he led the league with over 33 goals saved above average. And he did play longer in St. Louis. Don't get me wrong though, Binnington in that 2019 run was remarkable as well. Now let's get to the Buffalo Sabres. This is going to be an interesting debate here. Just keep it friendly, that's all I ask. Now the French Connection line of Gilbert Perreault, Rick Martin, and René Robert was one of the best lines ever assembled. But when it comes to these players in their prime, I think there's a more dominant line out there. So at center, if we're talking about longevity, it is Perreault easily. But because of the prime of his career, I have to choose Pat LaFontaine. Over a 2-year stretch with 141 games played, he scored 99 goals and 142 assists for 241 points, and he was a finalist for the Hart that second year. Speaking of which, on one wing we have Alexander McGillney, a man possessed that same year, putting up 76 goals, including 11 game winners. He ended up with 211 goals in 381 games with Buffalo. As for my other wing, now Rick Martin for the French Connection line averaged over 50 goals in 3 consecutive years, but we're missing some size on this line, so the 6'4", 220-pound Dave Anderchuk could certainly fill that void. In the early 90s, he had back-to-back years of 28 and then 32 power play goals. On defense, we have Phil Housley. He was nearly a point-per-game defenseman in Buffalo, and for the other defensemen, I selected Mike Ramsey. He may have been their best shutdown defenseman ever, although I gotta say Rasmus Dahlin could be in that Norris Trophy conversation at some point very soon. And in goal, it's gotta be the Dominator, Dominik Hasek. There have been some other very good goaltenders with the Sabres. Let's move on to the Calgary Flames. So at center, I have Joe Nieuwendyk. He was a goal-scoring machine early in his career, hitting 45 goals twice and then 51 goals twice. Now, there might be an argument that in their primes in Calgary, Doug Gilmour was the better player, so let me know your thoughts on that. As for wingers, we have Jerome McGinley on one side. He won 2 Rocket Richards, and in 2002 won the Art Ross and the Pearson Award. Now, if I stuck with a true left wing, it'd probably be Gary Roberts. The Flames have lots of great right wingers. And speaking of which, with all due respect to Joe Mullen, it's got to be Theo Fleury. Twice he eclipsed 100 points, and in 1991 he finished 5th for the MVP. On defense, I've got Chopper Al MacInnis. He was a 4-time Norris Trophy finalist and won the Conn Smythe in 1989 as the MVP of the playoffs. And Gary Gary Suter could easily be the other defenseman, but he didn't win a Norris Trophy. Mark Giordano did that in 2019, and he also finished 9th for the Hart. As for the goaltender, now some might say Mike Vernon, but I still gotta go with Mika Kiprusoff. He won the Vezina Trophy and the Jennings Trophy in 6, and he was also a Hart Trophy finalist. Now to the Arizona Coyotes, we got this comment here from Rowdy. At center, Jeremy Roenick. On the wings, we've got Clayton Keller and Shane Doan. On defense, Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Keith Yandel. And in goal, Mike Smith. I agree with you on Roenick. He averaged 28 goals and 42 assists over his first 5 years with Arizona, or I should say Phoenix. On one wing, we have Shane Doan, an excellent all-around forward and longtime captain who could put up 25 to 30 goals even in the dead puck era. As for my other wing, Clayton Keller could certainly be in the conversation, but Keith Tkachuk finished 10th for the Hart in the team's first year in Phoenix. He led the league with 52 goals. On defense, we've got Teppo Numminen. He was an excellent all-around defenseman that finished as high as 7th in Norris Trophy voting. And Oliver Ekman-Larsson had 2 seasons of over 20 goals, which is very impressive for a defenseman in that era. He finished as high as 7th for the Norris, but Keith Yandel, I gotta say, he finished 5th at one point. It's just I like the overall all-around skill set with our 2 defensemen. And in goal, now some might say Nikolai Hobby-Bulin or even Mike Smith for 2012, but in terms of playing in their prime, I'm gonna pick Mr. Universe, Ilya Bryzgalov. In 2010, he was a runner-up for the Vezina and was 5th for the Hart Trophy, and the next year he was 6th for the Vezina. Let's move on to the Boston Bruins. So we got this comment here from Angus. At forward, Milt Schmidt, Phil Esposito, and David Pastrnak. On defense, Bobby Orr and Ray Bourque. And in goal, we have Frank Brimzik. Now, many of the articles that I read left out some players from like before the 1950s, but nonetheless, I'm still talking about Hall of Fame players all around here. So at center, with all due respect to Milt Schmidt and Patrice Bergeron, I can't deny Phil Esposito this spot. If he did play some wing with Boston, I probably would have thought otherwise, but Espo won 2 MVPs and led the league in scoring 5 times. So I've got him at center. Now his teammate Johnny Busick is my left winger. He had a career best 51 goals and 65 assists in their run to the Stanley Cup back in 1971. And my right winger is Bam Bam Cam Neely, back-to-back seasons of over 50 goals and was named to 4 All-Star teams. On defense, there are so many legends here, from Eddie Shore to Zdeno Chara, even Dit Clapper. But as we know, it's Bobby Orr and Ray Bourque. They combined for 13 Norris trophies, with 8 going to Orr and 5 going to Bourque. And for our goaltender, it's kind of like the Montreal Canadiens. You've got so many amazing Hall of Fame caliber players like Tiny Thompson, Jerry Cheevers, Frank Brimzik, Tim Thomas, Tuukka Rask. But even though he played in the original 6 era against just 5 other teams, I gotta pick Frank Brimzik because he's the only goalie from this group to be a finalist for the MVP. And he did it twice. Now let's go to the Columbus Blue Jackets. So for center, you might choose RJ Umberger, but I'm gonna lean toward Ryan Johansson. His time in Columbus was brief, but his 26 goal, 45 assist season was the highest scoring year for any Jackets center. At wing, we have Rick Nash, 7 years of at least 30 goals, and he won the 04 Rocket Richard with 41 tallies. And for my other winger, he was just there for 2 years, but Artemi Panarin put up over a point per game and scored 13 game-winning goals. Imagine him playing with Rick Nash, although they're both left wingers. As for defensemen, I don't know too much about the Jackets from, let's say, over 10 years ago, so even though you might include Fedor Tutin or Jan Hejda, I'm gonna go with 2 players who've been in the Norris Trophy conversation. Seth Jones finished top 10 for the Norris Trophy twice, including 4th in 2018, and Zach Werenski has finished as high as 8th for the award. As for the goaltender, now Steve Mason had one hell of a rookie season, but Sergei Bobrovsky was arguably the best goaltender in the NHL at one point, winning 2 Vezina trophies in Columbus. Let's quickly go over the Vegas Golden Knights. So at center, I picked Jack Eichel, mostly for his outstanding 2023 playoffs. William Karlsson could certainly be a great honorable mention, even Chandler Stevenson. On one wing, we have Mark Stone, a fantastic playoffs in his own right, and one of the best defensive wingers we've seen in a long time, a 3-time Selke Trophy finalist. And for our other winger, we've got Jonathan Marchessault. He won the Conn Smythe last year, and he's always been a clutch scorer with the Knights. As for my defensemen, we have Shea Theodore, who finished as high as 6th for the Norris Trophy. He did that twice. And for a moment, I thought about Alec Martinez, but I just can't go against Alex Pietrangelo. As for goaltending, Adin Hill could certainly be in the conversation here for what he did in the playoffs and earlier in this season as I make this video, but with a larger body of work, I'm selecting Marc-Andre Fleury. After all, he won a Vezina and a Jennings Trophy back in 2021. Now we go to the Philadelphia Flyers. So we have this comment here from Nicholas. Forwards, Eric Lindros, Bobby Clark, Claude Giroux. Defensemen, Mark Howe and Chris Pronger. And as our goaltender, we have Ron Hextall. So for me, at center, I chose Bobby Clark. He won 3 MVPs and was an outstanding all-zone player. The left wing is Bill Barber. He hit 40 goals 5 times. He scored 10 game winners in the 75-76 year and led the league with 6 shorthanded goals 3 years later. Now, John LeClair would be an excellent alternative, as would Claude Giroux, as he finished 4th for the Hart Trophy in 2018 after he moved to wing. And drawing on that point, Eric Lindros was much better in his career as a center. For the other wing, I strongly considered Mark Recchi. He had 2 great stints in Philly, but I gotta go with Tim Kerr. At 6'3", 230 pounds, he adds size to this line, and although he had a much shorter career, he had an otherworldly prime. In a 3-year period, he averaged 56 goals and led the league every year in power play goals. The Flyers' best defenseman all time is Mark Howe. He was the Norris Trophy runner-up 3 times and was a Hart Trophy finalist in 1986, and Eric Desjardins finished top 5 in Norris voting and would log almost 27 minutes of ice time at one point, although I think Chris Pronger is a fine choice. As for the goaltender, I've got Bernie Parent. He won back-to-back Vezinas and Conn Smythes. That's ridiculous. Now let's get to the Nashville Predators. We got this comment here from Cheyenne. We've got Philip Forsberg, Mike Fisher, and Gustav Nyquist. He's having a great year so far, his first year in Nashville. On defense, we have Shea Weber and Roman Josi, and in goal, we have Pekka Rinne. The hardest decision for me was center. There have been plenty of good ones, but for me, it's hard to choose one whose prime was that much better than the others. Personally, I would love to have former captain Jason Arnott centering 2 very skilled wingers. He put up 227 points in 275 games and was a big dude at 6'5" and 220. On one wing, now Paul Kariya played only 2 seasons in Nashville, but that was primarily as a winger, and he still performed at a very high level, averaging about a point per game and finishing as high as 16th for the MVP. At the other wing, we have Philip Forsberg. He's scored over 30 goals 3 times, including a 42-goal season in just 69 games. Nice. But I definitely agree with the comment regarding the backside. So Shea Weber, a 3-time Norris Trophy finalist, and Roman Josi won the award in 2020, and 2 years later was the runner-up with a 96-point season. That's the best in Predators history, and not just among defensemen. And our goaltender is, of course, Pekka Rinne. He won the 2018 Vezina and was a finalist 3 other times. Now let's get to the New York Rangers, and this one might be up for some friendly debate. So at center, Mark Messier put up 107 points in the 91-92 season, winning the Hart Trophy and the Pearson, plus his 1994 playoffs were inspiring to say the least. One of our wingers is Andy Bathgate. He took home the 1959 Hart Trophy with 40 goals and 48 assists in 70 games. He led the league in scoring in 1962 as well. As for the other wing, I thought about Rod Gilbert. He's the all-time leading scorer in franchise history, but I couldn't resist choosing Jaromir Jagr. In the 05-06 season, he had 54 goals and 69 assists to finish 2nd in scoring and 2nd for the MVP. If it weren't for Joe Thornton's trade to San Jose, Jagr might have won the Hart. However, he did win the Pearson Award that year. On defense, we've got Brian Leetch. He won 2 Norris trophies and won the 1994 Conn Smythe over Messier and Mike Richter. And Doug Harvey won a Norris trophy with New York, and Brad Park finished runner-up a bunch of times, so a couple of amazing defensemen. But Hall of Famer, the Horse Harry Howell, was one of the best shutdown defensemen of his time, and in 1967 he took home the Norris. As for the goaltender, you have a couple of legends in goal. Mike Richter, the Stanley Cup winner, Ed Giacomin certainly, but prime Henrik Lundqvist lasted a long time. He won the 2012 Vezina and was a Hart Trophy finalist, and in a 10-year period, the lowest he ever finished in Vezina voting was 6th. He was a finalist for that award a total of 5 times. Somehow, the next team I selected was the New York Islanders, and this one is pretty straightforward. Our 3 forwards are the trio grand line, centered by Brian Trottier. You got Mike Bossy on one wing, you got Clark Gillies on the other, one of the greatest lines ever assembled. On defense, we have Denny Potvin. He won multiple Norris trophies, and Ken Morrow was known as one of the best shutdown defensemen of that era. As for the goaltender, in a 2-year period, Billy Smith won a Vezina trophy, a Jennings trophy, and the Conn Smythe. Now let's get to the Winnipeg Jets. So I've broken this up into 2 batches here. So we have the old Winnipeg Jets, although I'm focusing just on their time in the NHL and not the WHA. So at center, we have Dale Haverchuk. He would perennially hit 100 points. In the 84-85 season, he recorded 53 goals and 77 assists. He was the runner-up for the Hart Trophy behind Wayne Gretzky. At wing, Teemu Selanne had 76 goals and 56 assists in his rookie season. That alone gets him on here. And for the other wing, now Bobby Hull played a little bit in the NHL with the Jets, but Keith Tkachuk had a better prime in the NHL with Winnipeg, a monster 1995-96 season with 50 goals and 48 assists for a career best 98 points. For the 2 defensemen, Dave Babbage was consistently the best puck mover in the 1980s. He could typically hover around 70 points in a full season. And then Phil Housley took over the the honors in the 1990s, he finished as a Norris Trophy finalist in 1991, and 2 years later, put up a career-best 97 points. And in goal, now the goalies weren't the most elite for the old Jets, but Bob Essensa had a terrific 1991-92 season when he finished as a Vezina Trophy finalist. He led the league with 5 shutouts that year. And as for the current Winnipeg Jets, this is going to be a lot quicker. At center, Mark Scheifele. At wing, Blake Wheeler. He one time led the NHL in assists, and he finished as high as 8th for the MVP. The other wing is Kyle Connor. He's topped 47 goals before and could easily hit over 50 at some point. Defense, we've got Dustin Byfuglien. He could consistently put up 50 points and physically imposed his will game after game. And Josh Morrissey just this past season was 5th for the Norris. And in goal, who else would it be but Connor Hellebuyck? He's already won a Vezina Trophy and is perennially in that conversation. We can also cruise through the Seattle Kraken. So at center, I have Yanni Gourde. I just love him as a utility player. On one wing, we have Jared McCann. He's already hit over 40 goals in his career. And the other winger is Jordan Eberle, Mr. Clutch. On defense, we've got the pair of Vince Dunn, great breakout season last year, and Adam Larson. And in goal, now Joey Daccord is having a terrific year, but I'm still giving this to Philip Grubauer since he's won their lone playoff series and he played great in that series at that. Now let's get to my team, and that's the San Jose Sharks. So we got this comment here from Sakic Fan. Forwards, Patty Marleau, Joe Thornton, and Joe Pavelski. On defense, Burnsy and Boiler. And in goal, Yevgeny Nabokov. At center, I do have Joe Thornton. He won a Hart Trophy and an Art Ross in 06, and he finished 5th for the award 2 other times. One of my wings is Patrick Marleau. He did play that at times in San Jose, and just overall one of the faster players in the NHL at his peak. In his best season, he had 44 goals and 39 assists, and that placed him 9th for the MVP. And for my other winger, I could have chosen Jonathan Cheechoo for what he did with Joe Thornton, but that was more of a flash in the pan. And actually, I wanted to choose Owen Nolan for this. He finished as high as 5th for the MVP one time, but come on, Joe Pavelski is hard to pass up for his two-way play. His work in the face-off circle is unparalleled at times, and his clutch scoring is also unparalleled, except for maybe Logan Couture in the playoffs, but Pavs has finished as high as 7th for the MVP in San Jose. As for the 2 defensemen, now Brent Burns won a Norris Trophy and was a finalist 2 other times, and for that reason, I placed him ahead of Erik Karlsson, plus Brent Burns is much more physical. Now I love Danny Boyle, but if we want to shut down the opposition, we gotta select Marc-Edouard Vlasic. In his prime, in his 20s, he was exceptional, one of the best shutdown defensemen in that era. As for the goaltender, in the 07-08 season, Yevgeny Nabokov finished runner-up for the Vezina and 7th for the MVP. He played a league-high 77 games and won a league-best 46 of them. We've got 3 more teams here, guys. So the Pittsburgh Penguins, they have too many first-ballot Hall of Fame centers that I could just make a line with them. But this is all about making a proper line. So at center, we've got Mario Lemieux. Sorry, Sidney Crosby. Sorry, Gino. I know he played a little bit of wing, but really, Evgeny Malkin at his peak is a center. And Ron Francis too, I can't forget about him. So at left wing, the best true left winger in franchise history is Kevin Stevens. He's finished as high as 8th in Hart Trophy voting. And as for the right wing, although Mark Recchi could certainly be here, it's gotta be the ageless wonder, Jaromir Jagr. For defensemen, now Paul Coffey didn't win a Norris in Pittsburgh, but he finished in the top 5 in voting 3 times, and Chris Letang has finished top 10 in Norris voting 8 times and was a finalist for the award in 2013. As for goaltending, this might be a bit controversial. Now, Marc-Andre Fleury was never a finalist for the Vezina in Pittsburgh, whereas Tom Barrasso was a finalist twice, and so that's why I've chosen him. On to the Colorado Avalanche. So we got this comment here from, I don't know how to say the first part, but Mercer. Joe Sakic, Milan Hajduk, Mikko Rantanen, Rob Blake, and Cale Makar on defense, and I think I cut this off, but probably Patrick Waugh in goal. So, for center, whose prime was better? Joe Sakic or Peter Forsberg? And who knows, we might eventually include Nathan MacKinnon in that conversation. For this lineup, it all depends on who the wingers are. So for one of those, Milan Hajduk is often regarded as the best winger in Avalanche history. He had 5 seasons of at least 35 goals and put up 50 goals in 02-03, and that was tops in the NHL. For the other wing, now the Avs have had a few future Hall of Famers on their current roster, and I think Mikko Rantanen could certainly be one of them. He's carried the team offensively at times and is a workhorse on the power play. He had a career-high 55 goals last year, so I chose him. So when it comes to center, I want the guy who's the most capable of setting up 2 excellent goal scorers. So for that reason, Burnaby Joe, I apologize, but I'm going with Fopa here. In 02-03, he led the league in assists and points. He won the Hart Trophy, and like Joe Sakic, he was also excellent defensively. As for the two defensemen, now Ray Bourque was a runner-up for the Norris Trophy, but Rob Blake was in Colorado a little longer, and he was also a finalist and finished top 5 3 years in a row for that award. As for the other defensemen, Adam Foote would be a great pick here as well, but I gotta say, Cale Makar has already worked wonders on the ice. A 3-time Norris Trophy finalist, he's won the award once, and he also has a Conn Smythe. A Blake-Makar pairing would just turn heads. And as for our goaltender, Patrick Waugh won a Conn Smythe and was a Vezina Trophy finalist twice with the Avs. I actually realized I lied earlier. We have 2 more teams left. So we have the Vancouver Canucks. We got a couple of comments here, but Theo, I think you hit the nail on the head. Sedin Twins and Pavel Bure. On defense, Matthias Ohlund and Quinn Hughes, and Bobby Lou in goal. So that's exactly what I went with here. Henrik Sedin won the MVP in 2010. He's the center. At wing, Daniel Sedin won the scoring title and the Pearson Award the following year. Their chemistry as a unit is second to none, but if you were to sub in Marcus Naslund, I would totally understand. And at the other wing, Pavel Bure had back-to-back seasons of 60 goals. And if the Sedins never played in Vancouver, we could probably choose a line of, let's say, Elias Pettersson, Marcus Naslund, and Pavel Bure. As for the defensemen, this was a little tough at first. Matthias Ohlund is regarded as perhaps the team's best defense-first defenseman. He finished 10th in Norris Trophy voting in 2002. As for the other guy, how about Quinn Hughes? He's the fastest defenseman to get to 200 assists in league history, and he may even hit 100 points this year. And lastly, for the goaltender, Kirk McLean was a 2-time Vezina finalist and was spectacular in the 94 playoffs. But even so, I still have to choose Roberto Luongo. He was a 2-time Vezina finalist, and in 2007, he was a runner-up for the MVP. And heck, he was even team captain. And our last team is the Carolina Hurricanes. We're just focusing on Carolina, not Hartford. So for center, you probably have 4 great choices. Now, Ron Francis was still very good in his time with the Hurricanes at the end of his career, but Rod Brind'Amour was a little bit better, I think. He won back-to-back Selke trophies, the first coming in 2006 when he captained them to the Stanley Cup. Eric Stahl was nearly a Hart Trophy finalist in 2006 with a franchise-best 100 points, so he's no slouch, and we all know how good Sebastian Aho is. Now for the wings, it wasn't easy because there weren't 1 or 2 guys who really stood out from the pack, but for one of them, I went with Ray Whitney, who in his mid-30s was nearly a point-per-game player, and on the other wing, I have Jeff O'Neill, who in a 3-year stretch averaged 34 goals, including 13 on the power play. On the flip side, I chose 2 defensemen who are currently in the NHL. Jacob Slavin has finished as high as 5th for the Norris Trophy and is regarded as an elite shutdown defenseman, and Dougie Hamilton thrived playing with Jacob Slavin, finishing 7th for the Norris Trophy in 2020 and 4th the next year. And lastly, in goal, Cam Ward finished as high as 7th for the Vezina, doing that twice, and he won the Conn Smythe in 2006. Alright, so how did I do with your favorite team, and what is your favorite team's biggest regret ever, whether that's a trade or a free agent signing that still haunts you to this very day? Comment down below, and while you're at it, hey, why don't you drop a taco emoji just for getting to the end of this video? Don't forget to tap join below to become a member and get an exclusive video like this for defunct teams like the Whalers and the Thrashers. And lastly, do skadoosh that like button for me because that helps our channel grow. Thanks so much for tuning in, Twisters. I'm Nick, and I'll catch you later.